Hi, Park class. My name is Nancy Ty. I'm a 2014 Park alum, and Sarah has asked me to talk a little bit about my time at the Red Cross doing disaster preparedness. Before I start talking about that, a little bit about me is I currently live in Seattle, Washington. I am in my second year of doing my master's in public health at the University of Washington. And before I started grad school, I worked at the Red Cross for 3 years doing disaster preparedness for the state of Washington. And I'm really excited to share a little bit about that and maybe some questions for you to think about as you start your Learning Lab 1 adventure in Wilmington and I think Lumberton. Yeah, so I think I'll start there and then I'll give my contact information at the end, or you can ask Sarah if you have any follow-up questions. So starting with the Red Cross, I served as a regional disaster preparedness specialist, again, serving all of Washington State. And my main role there was to help educate communities from youth to everyone else about disaster preparedness, what to expect in our region, either that's on the eastern Washington, which has wildfires, to western Washington's, where we talk a little bit more about earthquakes, and how to prepare yourself, like having the information and then learning some of those skills and tips that will help keep you, your family, your neighbors, your pets even safe during an emergency. And a big thing that we talk about is, again, preparedness and how to build a kit, have a go bag. So even basic first aid as well. These are some of the skills that we think are important for all people to have in order to feel safe and be safe during an emergency, because during a catastrophic emergency, a lot of times we think, oh, we'll have someone come in and be able to help us. But in the case of, at least for us in Western Washington, if our big earthquake comes, like we're looking at least 2 weeks being on our own, because everything will be down. Even from a federal level, the response might take a little while to get there. So I definitely learned a lot. I graduated from undergrad with a degree in human biology and nutrition. And so when I jumped into this preparedness role, I had a lot to learn myself. And I think a lot of those skills have helped me since I've left the Red Cross and started undergrad or grad school at UW. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the work that I did at the Red Cross. I was able to be deployed twice. So once to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when the flooding happened there. And then a little closer to home, I was deployed for Hurricane Matthews 2 years ago, when that hit on our southeastern coast. And both times I went on the disaster assessment team, and that's where we would go out after it was safe to see what kind of damage had happened, to record each home and the damage so that we could then give resources and some financial assistance to the people who were impacted by that. Again, learned a lot. In disaster preparedness, it's definitely a different culture. We have incident command structure, which is really helpful in a really chaotic environment, because you know who to respond to and what to do. It's very structured. But it was also really neat because we got to use some new technology that had just rolled out. Again, in the world of preparedness and disasters, you don't get a lot of chances to practice it or perfect it because every situation is different, and disasters don't wait for your own timeline before they strike. So it was really fun to get to learn how to use this new smartphone app to do this disaster assessment, where before it was done by paper and hand, we would go in teams and cars to each house, stop, like look at the address, record it, look at the damage. At the end of the day, all that paperwork would then have to be entered into a computer system. But this new smartphone app exponentially decreased the time it took for teams to be able to go out and do that disaster assessment, but then also gave us like a live map for folks back at headquarters to like send additional supplies or cleanup supplies or food to folks who are in the act of cleaning up afterwards. So really exciting because I think it's important that, the field keeps innovating and using new technologies. But yeah, it was really humbling to go and be able to work. There were long days, but again, learning so much from people and getting to use some of the skills that I know to the team, yeah, was just something I think I'll always remember and hopefully get the chance to do again once I have more time after grad school. So some other things that Sarah asked me to do or talk about is questions for y'all to consider as you go and talk to different people who are working in the field. So I do hope you get a chance to talk to someone from the Red Cross. I'm not sure if you were able to get in contact with someone from FEMA, but there are plenty of local organizations doing really wonderful work as well. And so I have just a really short list of things to just think about. I know you all are super busy, so I don't want to take too much of your time. One thing that I mentioned earlier is, yeah, just maybe ask whoever you get to talk with their use of technology in a disaster response. How are they keeping up with the new technologies that are available today? And another important aspect is its usability as well. So from my experience at the Red Cross, our volunteers tended to be older and not as comfortable using technology. So though we had this brand new smartphone app that was supposed to make things so much easier and faster, I was actually brought into headquarters during my first deployment because I was concerned about how folks were being able to use this technology. I saw a lot of frustration. The screens are small. It's hard to be precise because we were having to drop pins where houses were, homes were that we saw. And so the usability was not super great. And again, it was the first time it was being used. And so hearing all this feedback, and I jumped in to help create guides for people to use, using screenshots, walking people through tips and tricks of how to use smartphones that they maybe weren't used to. They were an iPhone user, we were using Android, so what the layout was like, how to change the screen brightness. So yeah, maybe just something, if it's appropriate, to ask whoever you're talking with, how do they use technology? How do they incorporate it? How do they make sure it's usable? Another thing is, how do response and recovery organizations build relationships during blue sky times? So blue skies is when you're not in a disaster response, people kind of have their normal duties. And oftentimes community building, relationship building is an important component of that because you can't wait until a hurricane or a wildfire happens to then say, oh, actually, we need to work with you to do this, that, and the other. So what are people doing now to build those relationships ahead of time? Another thing is, how do these organizations address equitably serving their communities? This is something that is really important to me. So while I was at the Red Cross, and even now, after I've left, I'm working with an organization, almost like a coalition called the Disability Advocacy Group, and it's a group that is representative of the community of people with functional and access needs, specifically working with emergency managers and sheltering to make sure that all people are served equitably during those times. And so yeah, how do organizations plan to serve all members of their community in a manner that's respectful and supportive, allowing people to maintain their autonomy and independence? Yeah, so maybe just some questions on how do they do that? What's their planning like around that? Do they have a special task force? Is it just integrated in if they're doing sheltering or in their training? Questions around that. Another question is, how do budgets or budget cuts affect the work of these organizations, whether that's on a federal level, a national level, a local level? Yeah, how do finances affect change, influence the way that these organizations can work and do their job? Maybe another one is consider, this is a broader picture one, but consider people who live in areas that get hit by natural disasters. And so on one end of the spectrum, you might be thinking of like beach homes, waterfront properties. And then on the other hand, we have lower income folks where the land that they might be living on is not as expensive because it's maybe prone to these natural disasters. And thinking about what recovery looks like for these different communities, short-term and long-term recovery. So maybe something to think about is even the impact on Hurricane Katrina. What's that looking like now? How are folks recovering after, the media headlines fade away and then disaster response organizations pack up their operations and leave the area, right? So those folks are still there, and their recovery looks really different depending on income level, socioeconomic status. So yeah, I just encourage you to look more deeply at that and with a critical eye as well. And for me, since I'm in public health, again, thinking about what are the health implications of that, of disasters, and how can folks be healthy and safe while we plan for more severe weather encounters as our climate is changing. Yeah, so these are just some questions just to think about. Ask why a lot, hopefully for Learning Lab 1, but also as you continue on your learning adventures, and ask who as well, who's affected, who is included, and who isn't. I think these are questions that will serve you well for the rest of your life. And if you have any other questions or any follow-up, I know this was kind of a quick blurb, word dump, about public health or about disaster preparedness or my time at the Red Cross, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sarah has my information, but you can also email me at nthai0612@gmail.com, or find me on Facebook. I'm really happy to chat anytime, or help answer any questions, or maybe give you more questions to think about. So have a wonderful trip, and I hope you learn lots and ask good questions of the folks you are going to be meeting. Yeah, I'm really excited for you all, and hopefully talk to some of you later.